Good evening. Hi. I like the energy. Amazing energy for the last week of classes. I love that. Hi, I'm Clara Fernandez-Vara. I'm one of the full-time faculty at the NYU Game Center, and I would like to welcome you to the last installment of the lecture series of this academic year. So first of all, I would like to thank our sponsors of this lecture series, Take-Two Interactive and Empire State Development, who make possible having these events a few times a semester. And this is the last but not the least of our lecture series. We are closing off with our own Karina Popp, who is visiting. Who obviously has a lot of fans in this room. I think we're all super fans of Karina. Karina Popp is visiting arts professor. What's the title?
Visiting assistant arts professor?
Visiting assistant. I knew I was missing something. Visiting assistant arts professor, and has been working with us, in that title for the last 2 years. But Karina's relationship with the Game Center goes back to long time. I don't want to think about it because this was my second year of working here when I met Karina. Karina's a graduate from our program, but has also done a lot for herself and her own career. In her bio, which I'm going to read even though I know that she doesn't like it, Karina Popp makes games about banality and bodies and babies, right? Yeah, babies. Her work has been selected at festivals such as the IGF, Come Out and Play, Now Play This, and Fantastic Arcade. And even though a lot of her career has been tied to New York City, that she's been traveling a bit and all over the world. You went to Sweden, right? She's going far. We just like her here. What she's going to talk about today is maybe a rant. A bit of a rant, but I think that's how we feel like these days. I think that ranting is healthy. So please, Les, welcome to, with a round of applause.
Hello. I have a problem. And tonight, you have a problem too. I'm sorry. My problem is that I actually have nothing to say about games. Your problem is that, and this is a totally reasonable assumption, that you are coming to the NYU Game Center lecture series to hear a lecture about games. And I don't have anything to say about them, or play, or design, or anything. I got nothing. I'm sorry. So if you want to, you can leave now. I wouldn't blame you by any means. If you want to exit out of Twitch, that's okay. Tonight, my problem is going to be your problem. I'm going to try to talk about games. But if you don't want my problem to be your problem, that's okay. You can leave. But I have had my problem of having a difficult time talking about games for 10 years. And I've had this problem for so long that, like an animal backed into a corner, the only thing I feel like I can do at this point is to bite. I need to bite the hand that feeds me. My problem is that when I try to think about video games, all I see are commodities, and specifically commodities that have empowered a resurgence of authoritarianism by virtue of what they are. And I don't just mean the usual suspects here. I'm not just talking about Call of Duty or whatever. I'm not even talking about Fortnite. I'm talking about all of it and all of us. I am talking about Disco Elysium. I'm talking about Grease. I'm talking about Journey. I'm talking about Dysphoria. I'm talking about Anthology of a Killer. I mean all of them, all of this, and I mean myself. I am my own problem. Convention dictates that at this point I need to introduce myself. So, for those of you who don't know me, My name is Karina Popp. I make games that I call them games for political reasons. I teach. Teaching is extremely important to me. The game that I'm probably best known for is called 10 Mississippi, that's the game that I went to Sweden at the Stugan Accelerator to work on. And it was nominated for some more awards. I showed it around at festivals and stuff, but that was kind of a while ago. I have made stuff in the intervening time, and I'm working on stuff right now, I swear. But my problem has gotten so large that I am at the point that I have a difficulty talking about my own work at this point, because I just don't have the words to describe it anymore. My problem is that the warp and weave of the field that I work in, game design and game design education, seems so strikingly artificial that I have difficulty engaging with critical discussions about games at all. The terminal thought I always arrive at is, well, that game is like that so that people would buy it. Even the games that are not for sale. They are like that because they come from a legacy of things made to be bought and sold. And I think I could live with this. It's a juvenile problem to have. And for a while I did. It was fine. I, did what anybody who does creative work does these days. I, did what I need to pay the bills. I made the kind of things that I found meaningful when I could. I played the kind of things that I found meaningful when I could. Millions of people do this every day. But this has gotten more difficult for me. Because every year, simultaneous to my, again, admittedly juvenile and myopic view of the critical possibilities of games, there is a second problem, which is video games are always at the scene of the crime. For every grifter, for every violent man, for every right-wing extremist, for every man that's all of the above, video games are there. Or they're in 2 degrees of separation. These are not two problems. They're the same problem, which is not a new observation by any means. But I've gotten to the point where I don't think it's just the power fantasies and the insular gamer communities. I think it's everything. I think it's in the entirety of what we do, with no exceptions. The formalization of video game making and knowledge contributed to the resurgence of mask-off fascism. And I cannot emphasize enough how sincerely I mean everything. I mean Life is Strange. I mean Games for Change. I mean Rules of Play. I mean Howling Dogs. And while it wasn't inevitable, it is now irrevocable. So tonight, if you will indulge me, I would like to explain my problem and kind of give a call to action, because I don't think I'm alone. I think parts of what I feel and think, a lot of people feel and think. I just think that I'm uniquely fixated on solving it. Because if I can't solve it, I think I kind of have to be done with games. Maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I don't have what it takes to stay here. But I don't want to give up on games. I don't want to leave. And I'm convinced if I find a way to solve this for myself, if I can find a way to talk about video games that is new, that doesn't feel like compulsive lying, I could have something to say about them. But I don't think I can solve it alone. So in any case, tonight, my problem is your problem. In sum, my problem is that, and I'm sorry, there are at least 3 giant chunks of text in bad presentation form. Please forgive me. Video game making practice and knowledge, AKA game design, was railroaded through commercial design. The fulcrum of commercial design is a user from whom value can be extracted. Thus, game design as a field of knowledge is inaccurate and insufficient for an enduring means of creating and understanding video games. It is inaccurate in that it obsessively obfuscates its commercial interests under the guise of play and creativity. It is insufficient in that commercial interests can only produce a narrow range of experiences. Without a complete deconstruction, and in some cases rejection, of the field, Video game making as a form of human expression will be stuck in a boom-bust cycle that lives only on the goodwill and success of an industry that is a net negative for our society and our planet. My problem is knowledge. I don't want to be clear about this because I'm going to say some names of people and names of institutions and names of books. I am not calling any individual out here. I'm calling myself out in the sense that I am a part of something that I don't know I can stomach. Because people make knowledge. This is a problem of knowledge to me. And I'm sorry, we are gonna have to do a little bit of theory because that's kind of my jam. We gotta think about how knowledge is created. Notable bald person and French philosopher Michel Foucault writes in Discipline and Punish, perhaps too we should abandon a whole tradition that allows us to imagine that knowledge can exist only where the power relations are suspended and that knowledge can develop only outside its injunctions, its demands, and its interests. He continues, we should admit rather that power produces knowledge and not simply by encouraging it because it serves power or applying it because it's useful. It is not the activity of the subject of knowledge that produces a corpus of knowledge, useful or resistant to power, but power knowledge, the processes and struggles that transverse it and of which it is made up, that determines the forms and possible domains of knowledge. Put as simply as I can, we often say knowledge is power, right? I guess, sure. But it is equally true that power is knowledge. Knowledge doesn't necessarily reflect truth or fact. Knowledge must be formed. We must choose what knowledge is. To create knowledge, one must be powerful, and to be powerful, one must have access to knowledge and the ability to create it. So in game design, I contend that it is not the activity of making games that produces game design knowledge, but power knowledge, the idea that knowledge and power are so intertwined that they are indistinguishable. Over decades, what it means to make and study games has been the subject of collaboration and struggle and accidents and intention. Millions of people, players, makers, thinkers, researchers, but none of it is neutral. Knowledge in game making has been done in a variety of forms. There's professional conferences, there's professional organizations, there are university programs, and there are textbooks. There are professionals and creatives who do try to share their knowledge in a more accessible way online. I am focusing on the highly formal world of a university program for game design. But the fingerprints to me on it are quite stark. Maybe it's just because I'm so close. I want to take game studies as an example because there's a quote of people already doing similar work in relation to game studies that I quite like. Last year, GameStudies.org published an article called Disciplining Games. In the article, the authors dissect the concept of game studies being inherently interdisciplinary and its role in the academic study of games. If you have ever been in a conversation with someone talking about game studies at length, including me, I have said the thing I'm about to say. When I'm explaining game studies to someone, I will say, oh, game studies, it's inherently interdisciplinary. And you nod, you're like, yeah, totally. Game studies is inherently interdisciplinary. No, it's not. Why? Why would it be inherently interdisciplinary? No one goes on to explain it. So this article, Disciplining Games, argues that the positioning of game studies as interdisciplinary was a political move. Doing so meant early game studies scholars could present at a variety of conferences. They could teach in a range of departments. They could justify research funding, and all of this irrespective of discipline. But there are consequences to this shortcut. In the article, they argue that it's been a hindrance to the development of the field and to early career scholars. They write, interdisciplinarity can sometimes act as a political or epistemic short-circuiting, displacing hard conversations about constructions of knowledge and politics by carving the field into multidisciplinary purviews. Institutional practices, histories, and politics thus become further shaped by ideological forces and epistemic regimes, internal and external to the field. A choice that was made to genuinely try to do something, to study something, has had ramifications decades later. We, as the makers of games, are also living in the consequences of how our field was formed. And again, perhaps because I'm so close to it, the obvious influence of power is maddening. In the 1990s and the 2000s, a number of very intelligent and creative people who I respect very much realized that games are really interesting, and they make them, and it's wonderful. Simultaneously, the industry is experiencing its early days of growth, and so these people are like, of course, we want to teach this in university programs. To teach a subject in a university is to consecrate its validity. In the case of the founding of the NYU Game Center, to teach game design at an art school is to validate it as creative labor. So to achieve this validity, they needed to persuade those in power at universities to give them access. Access to funding, access to space, access to students. The challenge, though, is that video games had a bad reputation. They're childish. They're entertainment slop. They're the domain of computer science, not art. But if you can establish a historical precedent for the study of games, then you've got a foothold. This is just a continuation. Video games are just a new shape of an ancient tradition. So in the case of the NYU Game Center,
we went to Popp's library and we went to the section with books on games, and we pulled down all these books, many of which we hadn't even heard of before. Books from sociology and anthropology and cultural history and psychology and psychological development. And we started thinking through this topic and putting together an overall framework for how we wanted to think about games and how we wanted to teach games.
Caught in 4K. To found a field, we mimicked a pattern of power relations. We sought and retroactively justified a connection to existing knowledge. We built new knowledge upon that existing knowledge, and we taught that knowledge to students who would go on to teach that knowledge to their students. From a purely functional perspective, I question the use of most of the lessons that formalized game design knowledge would teach us because it is really difficult to untangle the provenance of those lessons. Which isn't to say that reading Huizinga isn't worthwhile, or that what is taught in game design programs is a bunch of nonsense. But I can't help but question what else there could have been or could be if things were different. This is especially troubling for me because it's a part of a pattern of what we choose to value and how we describe making a game, and it's a problem we keep confronting. Because video games aren't real. I don't mean not real in the sense that they're virtual worlds or that they exist on a computer. Formally, video games do not map onto anything that existed prior to video games. Video games aren't games. I'm going to say games as a shorthand throughout this lecture, and I probably already have. I don't mean games, I mean video games. I think this is important because this lecture doesn't happen if video games don't exist. This program doesn't exist if video games don't exist. But it is rhetorically useful to say that video games are games. But in order to justify the creation of an academic field of study, you can't just pluck a dead Dutch dude from the stacks of Bobst and call it a day. It also has to be novel. You must make the thing interesting. And Huizinga gives you a bonus by centering the game part of video games because you get the benefit of making a connection that is both historical and fresh and exciting. The aesthetic argument that backgammon leads to Mario sounds really cool. But video games aren't real, you guys. I don't think that you can make the case that analog games have a monopoly on the ancestry of video games. Could you describe a genealogy from backgammon to Mario? Totally. But But you could make just a compelling genealogy from the Odyssey to Mario, or anything else. Bongos to Mario. Astro Boy to Mario. Video games aren't anything. They're video games, which makes them incredibly difficult to fit into existing patterns of knowledge. We continue to struggle with this, and we still cannot reconcile the gap. When I wrote the description for this talk, Naomi asked if it had anything to do with the killed gameplay discourse, which I will admit I wasn't super read up on because I don't use social media anymore, but I tried to read and understand what was going on. Because at the time my answer was no, because in my head I wasn't really making an aesthetic argument, and I still don't think I am, even if it sounds like that. My answer is kind of, though, but also no. I think kill gameplay, or anti-gameplay loops, this idea that gameplay as we know it today is a self-fulfilling prophecy in which we create mechanics that incentivize addictive behavior, has the same echoes of anti-formalism, which I was at the time during the great heyday of anti-formalism, of not games, of death of the player, and I also would say on the player side, anti-games as service complaints. I think they all come from the same source, and I'm trying to describe that source tonight. To be clear, I don't have a problem with gamey video games. Ask Laura. My lunchtime game of choice is Civ 7 right now. That is what I play while I eat lunch. I like gamey video games. I don't want to make them, but I like them. The problem isn't games or gameplay. The problem is what games were used as cover for in the pursuit of describing an aesthetic practice. By centering games and their supposed interactivity, you have a convenient excuse for the actual force behind how we've built video game design. I think the core of all of these threads are the same thing. They're hitting up against this sense that game design as a field of knowledge is inaccurate and insufficient. I've previously argued that this is a problem of design, that game design itself is a flawed paradigm upon which to base a creative field because game design is the progeny of product design. So, for my students, if you have seen my Games 101 lecture, this is a shortened version of that for those who have not seen it. When I got this idea in my head, that it's game design's proximity to product design that I dislike, I thought I could look up an article or a book and find a solution to this discomfort, that something could reconcile it for me. I could read something that would make me feel better. And every time I've tried to look this up, and I've done it for years, I always end up a blog post by Frank Lance. Every time I end up here. It's a good blog post for the record, but it doesn't answer my question. Why is it game design? I have never found a real answer. Maybe it's a personal flaw of mine that I am convinced that I can always get answers from books or articles, that there's no problem I could possibly have that is novel enough to not have already been solved. But I don't have a ton to go off of on this one. I have pieces, but not everything. Why is it called game design? And what else could there be? So I've tried to do it myself. And I have a small example of what this could look like in theory. If I want to understand why game design is called design, I should go to the places where the knowledge has been consecrated. So I'll take a look at Colleen Macklin and John Sharp's textbook, Games, Design, and Play, A Detailed Approach to Iterative Game Design. In the chapter related to various considerations that are, by the premise of the book, inherent to interactive work, they write, beyond the peculiar reality that is video game interaction, game designers also have to consider how people engage with the interface of the game. Gillian Crampton-Smith proposed 5 characteristics of well-designed interactivity: clear mental model, feedback, navigability, consistency, and intuitiveness. The chapter then goes on to describe these characteristics in the context of video games. In a footnote on this bit, they cite where this is coming from. They say, articulated by Gillian Crampton-Smith in the foreword to Bill Modridge's book, Designing Interactions, 2006. So I have a line of genealogy. I have a place to go to. So I check out the book. In the same foreword, Crampton Smith says, designing for this new broad spectrum of humanity is more challenging than devising specialist tools for technical professionals. Our users are justifiably not prepared to spend time mastering tricky new systems, and they're not obliged to use our products. If they can't make them work, they take them back to the store. This isn't a gotcha. It's a demonstration. There's a connection here, and maybe I'm naive, but this makes me uncomfortable. It's a single small example of what I'm advocating for, of finding the lines and finding where things come from. Where did Crampton Smith get her schema for thinking about interactivity? I think that by understanding what is, we can understand what isn't. And we can have better words to describe what we do and what we make. Because I think if video games are just products, I cannot stomach that. Commercial interest here, for the record, and I'm sorry I have to get ahead of this argument, I don't just mean making something to be sold. I think game design does something incredibly different. I think it creates desire. Kill gameplay is about the discomfort of designing desire, incentivizing desire, rewarding acting on that desire, and the designer benefiting from that manufactured desire. When someone decries gameplay loops, or player-centric design, or formalism, I think this is actually what they're frustrated with. The tools that we use to describe our work are one and the same with product design. And as a maker of things that I call games, for political reasons, this is keenly frustrating because it's insufficient. I don't want to create and fulfill desire. I cannot describe what I do when I make a game. I don't have words for it. I can't teach it. Game design is a systemization of entertainment production, and to quote Adorno, there is no system without its residue. There is so much residue left from game design. The source of all this is the industry. And I'm using the industry in like the porn definition sense. You know it when you see it. GDC, Blizzard, Rockstar, the IDGA, Nintendo, Microsoft, a dude in a t-shirt and a sports jacket. The corresponding power to even make the case for teaching games in universities comes from the promise of the industry. The wealth, the attention, the visibility of doing something cutting edge. It all flows from the industry. And although I currently work at a university, I am still fed by the industry. My knowledge is sourced from them. The scraps of their power is how I was able to go to Stugan and work on my crappy art game for 2 months. This program only exists on the goodwill of the industry, and so the industry pays my rent. All of us are within or orbiting the industry's power. Social impact games, games in academia, games made on the margins. The hand of the industry feeds us. That is the nature of power. But we are not the only mouths that are fed by this hand. Gamergate, tech bro parasites, military propaganda are right next to us, eating it all up. Much has been made of the way that the construction of the gamer identity leads to stuff like Gamergate, which leads to disaffected men, to violence, and authoritarianism. I don't think that's up for debate. A whole group of angry people who were accustomed to having their desire manufactured and fulfilled is deeply susceptible to a government that promises the same. In a 2017 article entitled How Technocratic Hyper-Rationalism Has Birthed Right-Wing Extremism, Liz Ryerson wrote about the ways in which those of us unaligned with, for example, Gamergate, were so eager to run away from that association, to say that it's not us. But, as she writes, that is us. She says, games are a natural fit for realizing the self-fulfilling fantasies of hyper-rationalist, numbers-based thinking. Games provide fully realized worlds constructed out of hyper-masculine colonialist power fantasies and filled with racist and sexist caricatures. Games, in general, give a great amount of power to deeply troubling and oversimplified narratives. I think that ego-stroking power fantasies, caricatures that assure one that their own power and supremacy are natural, are only the unintended but ultimate result of what we do. I don't know how you can read about game design and read about product design and not hear the echoes of an authority figure who will satisfy your every desire, even the ones that you don't have yet. It's in everything. It is in feedback loops. It is in conveyance. It's in juice. It's in game feel. It's in playtesting. It's in iteration. All of it. The language that made reactionary gamers the way that they are is the very same language that our field uses to make things that we claim is somehow more meaningful. And I am the same as them because I feed from the same hand. I know what I'm describing is pretty academic. I work in academia, sue me. And while others don't like this kind of thing, this kind of breaking down of language, I like it. It's what attracted me to academia in the first place, because you're allowed to not just question why the world is the way it is, you're allowed to imagine how it could be, even if that is a little bit unreasonable. The unfortunate reality, though, is that working in games academia it's very conservative, lowercase c. There's a fear of losing the little power that we have. And I am saying this when I know and I'm proud to work at one of the most openly rebellious departments that I am aware of, but it's not enough. I want to find a way to make video games or talk about video games, and I don't want to do so using the very same tools that were used to create the Proud Boys. I believe that if we can deconstruct those words and those frameworks, if we question what we take for granted, we can abandon those tools. It's just, I can't do that by myself, and I need other people to agree with me. It must be done together. And maybe stuffy academic nonsense is not your thing. That's fine. The human mouth is remarkably versatile. Some teeth, they're really good at grinding. Other teeth are much better at crushing, and there is a difference. Your canines, which our canines are pretty blunted, but they're good for like gripping onto food, so that our sharper incisors can cut. What's important has nothing to do with what any individual tooth does alone. It's that they bite together. I told you earlier that I make games and I teach about games, but I don't think those are the most important things to know about me. The most important thing to know about me is that I am a coward. The people who know me may phrase it differently. They may try to make it sound nice. They may say that I'm shy, or I'm introverted, or worst of all, closer to the truth but more insulting, is that I'm sensitive. I am a coward. I know fear very well. And I know that the reason that you do not bite the hand is fear. Fear of consequences, fear for the next meal, fear for hurting the people that you love and respect. And I struggle to talk about games in part because I am scared. It's painful, and I am so afraid of pain. I do genuinely love video games, I swear. I exist because of video games. My parents were next door neighbors. My mom was the only kid on the street with an NES, and my dad made friends accordingly. A month before my mom turned 18, I was born. I grew up going to the payday loan place, and then going 2 doors down to Blockbuster at the mini mall, not to get movies, but to get games. We were on a first-name basis with the EB Games, later GameStop, manager. I have never seen either of my parents read a book. I've seen both of them play video games. It sounds ridiculous, but video games were a huge source of culture in my childhood, and to confront that as artifice is terrifying. I was supposed to be a person who had things to say about games. And in that regard, I have been a consummate failure, because I don't have anything to say about them. Because I'm a coward. We are living in a time where cowards are empowered. We, the cowards, are empowered to make easy choices from some very bad options, to make conservative choices, to choose accepting and protecting the scraps of power we hold. And unfortunately, I am in a field full of cowards who fear to bite the hand. I'm trying to not be a coward tonight. I'm trying to bite. While our individual experiences with video games may be beautiful, on the whole, the game industry is a drain of human labor, of human thought, and of human creativity. The game industry as an institution is unilaterally the enemy of a healthy, dynamic field of game making. And while I think I could maybe swallow that, I could probably deal with it. That our myopic commercial practice is what is, and I could sate myself on the genuinely wonderful and exciting work done on the margins. I cannot accept that that work done on the margins is still done in the space with an institution that has unapologetically empowered authoritarianism. Indeed, the impact of the industry on our current political environment is so apparent that I've come to believe that we are living in the ludic century, and that the sense that we are experiencing the revival of fascism in the West, and I believe that video games may be a fascistic art. What I want to say is that in a time of uncertainty about the world and our work, our field, if the game industry does truly die, and I don't think it will, I think that we would be better for it. But unfortunately, the artifice of video games as a means for creativity and expression is built upon that industry's success, because we built it there. Game design as a field of knowledge bent itself to that industry. It must be dismantled. The foundation of game design is rotten, wet, and infested with maggots. Nothing lasting can be built on it. The terms, the concepts, the frameworks, the tools must be taken apart, examined, and in some cases, not put back together. Such a deconstruction must be whole, meticulous, and antagonistic. We must bite. Thank you. Thank you, Logan.
Thank you.
How's it going, Clara?
It's going.
Cool.
Good job. Nice. Yes. I feel like we're in a concert. So thank you. That was awesome. Just for people to understand what Karina does, like this is not just like a theory talk. Like that was like a year ago, like was in the summer when we were talking about like game studies, like the MFA game studies class. Karina came to me and was like, "Can I use a baseball bat with the curriculum?" I'm like, "Yes." So like this is happening. So it's thanks to you. So
It was a light baseball bat this time. Maybe it'll get heavier. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, we can talk about it. Just like that's the thing. But yeah, I mean, like there's a lot to. I have a lot of notes, but I don't want to be the. Oh, hi. Hello. I have a lot of comments, but I don't know what my questions are. But one of the things that, let me start with this, because you have listed here a bunch of the MFAs. I see MFA names. So, and you said that teaching is like, part of who you are. So what do you learn from teaching? What do you learn from the MFAs? How is this informed by your day-to-day?
Yeah, well, in this case specifically, I was given the chance to teach grad seminar, and I am not joking. I genuinely have a really hard time engaging with games critically. I have a panic attack anytime anyone is like, "What did you think about this game?" or "What do you think about this idea?" I'm like, "I don't know. I have no idea. It's a car. It's a toaster. I don't know." And so, grad seminar, you have to talk about something important. They're grads. It's their seminar. And they knew from game studies, I think, that I have this fixation. I called it a conspiracy theory at the time. Not a real conspiracy, but the idea of sort of this sort of web of power and knowledge that I couldn't understand. And I kind of just pitched it to them. I was like, "You want to help me figure this out? Because I have to give a lecture at the end of spring, and maybe we could have a discussion."
This is outsourcing labor.
Exactly. I am the problem. I am the problem. And so. Because I personally, I tend to get in my own head about a lot of these things, and I knew that a lot of the students had similar feelings or thoughts, and that it would be a good opportunity to have that discussion in a way that I don't think that we ever give them the chance to. And I can't emphasize enough how much just listening to other people think about the same thing out loud is revealing about something that you are stuck on, I guess. And so, for example, an earlier version of this talk, I just wanted to say I want to destroy game design. But every time I said that, Hatim would be like, "I don't know what that means." So it was really integral to me kind of not looking too stupid. So these students in particular are incredibly intelligent and wonderful and really helped me think some of this stuff through. But teaching in general is just as I said, it's very important to me. More important to me than games, probably. It's a thing that I think is beautiful and I want to be a part of,
Yeah. Well, again, this is part of the cool things that we do here. And one of the things that I wanted to kind of bring up and ask, because your lecture is both about theory and practice. You start talking about game studies and also about the industry. And I think that we're in an environment where that makes sense to us, but it's not part of the discourse. And I think that part of the problem, which is has many limbs, is that the habit of thinking about games, which used to be the name of Intro to Game Design many years ago. Intro to Game Studies was called Thinking About Games, because that was a new thing, thinking about them.
It's wild.
Right, it's wild, right. So it's what's the, is it for you that you cannot extricate both, or I don't, and I know you probably don't either, but it's can we extricate both, studying the games when we make them, what is the, or not, or what's the?
I mean, I think people
separation?
do. I think they do it every day. I like it because, I don't know, it's fun to think about thinking and fun to think about what you're doing. And in some way, I think that the idea of game studies, or just kind of looking critically at work and at art, is vital to me because you need to understand its place in the world, and I just don't think you can do that from a purely practice perspective. And I think that applies to anything, but I just think it's super, super important in our field in particular, because I just think that sometimes bad things happen in and around our field. Mm-hmm. And the more that we have the capacity to think critically on some level, even if you don't agree with me that it all ought to be dismantled, I think makes the world a better place in some capacity.
Yeah, but I think you've put your finger on it at the beginning, talking about game studies specifically, when game studies started, it's true that many people talk about it as interdisciplinary, including myself. I'm like, I want to go into games.
I do too, because
because I like a lot of stuff and I can just mix it together, so isn't it fun, right? But I was recently talking to colleagues about going to different conferences and realizing that there's not game studies like the DIGRA conference, for example, is mostly humanities and social sciences. Foundations of Digital Games is mostly computer science. So the ideal was that we were all going to mix all the disciplines and talk to each other, and it was going to be great. But then we realized we all have different vocabulary and different politics. Like that's the thing that bringing up, kind of like showing that the emperor wears no clothes. I think that's also something very important, right? That it's like, is it really interdisciplinary? Like, what are the disciplines? Like, what do you see as remaining there at all?
If they're, I mean,
like, what are the disciplines? Like, is it really interdisciplinary?
I don't think so. I don't think it has to be. I think that, and maybe I'm misunderstanding the logic behind it, because I feel like, again, it's a thing that everyone says because we're all really excited about this thing, right? And it seems like there's a number of angles to approach it from, right? And you want to be in the room with all of the people that know all those things. But when I was pausing to think about it, I was like, but why? What is it about that doesn't, what makes games special and unique that warrants such a thing? So I genuinely don't think it has to be. I don't know what that means, given that we have insisted upon it being interdisciplinary. I just don't understand why it can't just be media studies, I guess, because that's what I like.
Hey, you're talking to media studies. We're biased. Let's make it just media studies, right? That's where it come from. We dictated that it should be that. Yeah, but I think that there was also like the land grab at the beginning of the field, like the boring. This is why it's good to take the baseball bat to the curriculum every now and then. We don't talk so much or at all about the ludology, narratology debate. Thank God. But part of it, what it was a kind of land grab. Like, games are special, but I wasn't clear how it was special. We should not study, part of it was like, we should not study games as literature, said by people who were in literature departments, by the way. I was in literature. That's how I got to games too. But this kind of like, I think that the interdisciplinary, like, game studies is interdisciplinary is going the other way around. It's like, we're going to make, the game studies is its own thing, but it was really video game studies, then the non-digital studies came later. And there was this, again, like this land grab. And I think that part of what we struggle with now, and it's a bit as a counterpart of the clip with Frank before, right? It's again like there's all these decisions that happen early on with good intentions, but now we're kind of like stuck, right? Like that's what are the things like you teaching game studies? Like what is the thing that is the biggest burden? You can start listening. I can tell you mine. We can share.
What do I complain about, you guys? I'm lost. I don't remember, and I complain about it a lot. I think a lot of it for me is a repetition of what one thinks one should do in academia, and that's a part of the foundation of the field. And I had this conversation with you and Naomi when we were talking about the baseball bat to the curriculum, because I just didn't want to do Huizinga and Kaiwa. I was just like, okay, I won't do it. And then you both very reasonably were like, they kind of have to know about, like,
heard about them at least because they keep appearing. Yeah.
So because that is what we do. That is how you build knowledge, is that you teach it and you build upon it. And you can't get to the cooler things that in some ways are referencing those earlier works. I had them do a reading from Tara Fickle's The Race Card, because there's this one line that I really like, because she just calls out the fact that in every game design or game studies class where you read Huizinga, you read the same chapter and that's it.
Not the racist parts.
Yes, and you ignore the racist part.
I have that reading for the undergraduates.
I think like the foundation is, I also think there's this other thing that maybe is related to the interdisciplinary thing, and it's like a lot of the readings of game studies, some of which I like, are all referencing a variety of other works, right? Like, I have to explain field theory, or I have to explain like the idea of the construction of knowledge, because they're all citing things because they have a graduate education in all of these things, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, well, video games, and I also have to give you on the side a graduate education of all this stuff, and I always kind of wonder, what if we just read those things that the scholars are reading?
Did I subject you when you were a student to the Lara Mulvey? Was it your year?
You did, and I think we should continue subjecting.
Although it's very hard because people have not seen those movies because they're like really old. Lara Mulvey talks about the male gaze, if you know a bit about, like, it's like film 101 kind of theory, and I love it. And a lot of people talk about the gaze in film, and we talk about it in games, but people don't read the article. But it's also hard because it talks about movies from like the 60s and the 70s that people have not seen now. So like that's a bit of the struggle. It's kind of like, well, if it's interdisciplinary, you're getting a peek, and like you need all this other background in order to follow it. So that's part of like I don't have a solution.
I don't either. I also I just realized I was being a coward again, and I was giving safe answers. Sorry, my biggest gripe with game studies is that it doesn't acknowledge what games are. And I'm frustrated by it. There's a kind of like naive excitement about them that ignores the strong economic incentive to a degree I think is unrealistic and dishonest. And I think that frustrates me. And it is a part of the reason it's hard for me to talk about them in that way and engage with some of those texts.
Yeah, I mean, like, part of it is like looking at the context. I think that's part of the academic problem, that at times we're kind of like, and the idea. I think that we talk a lot about ideals. And in a department like ours, it's kind of hard because we're doing the thing, and then we have to go out in the world and, pitch to clients. If you've pitched to a client, you know how hard it is, just to put it mildly. One of the things I wanted to bring about, so because we're talking about like game design, right? And like, what is game design? And I realized at a certain point that if we talk about like game designers, before the 90s, they were not designers, they were inventors, right? And what's the idea of like inventing versus designing? Like, what would be the difference? Like, can you think of like what is the difference between inventing and design? I mean, inventing is also like, I can think of patents, like this idea of like the invention, but I don't know like why this shift? Should we go back to being inventors? Like, what's the...
No, because I don't like that either.
It's fine. Game right. I like game right.
That's good. Yeah. Well, okay. So I like gestator. Game gestator.
There you go.
In grad seminar, everybody chose their title.
Okay.
So we had like game necromantic, a bunch of things. Yeah, I mean, I think the designer thing comes from its professionalization and its association with existing patterns of design, that some people who were already doing design in other ways applied their knowledge to the field of games. Yeah, and it just troubles me. And I think it is a purely linguistic thing, which is why I didn't include it. But like inventor or designer are words that I don't care for. I had like this whole idea that I wanted to talk about of the concept of intelligent design, which was used as a smokescreen for creationism. And going to high school in the South, I had my biology teacher who said he wasn't going to teach us about evolution because he's not allowed to teach about intelligent design. And being in a very, very, very religious area, I kind of always felt the thumb of this idea of a God that designed me. And I don't want to put other people under a thumb. An inventor does the same thing in my brain of like, oh, I'm the genius who made this thing. It doesn't squeak me out as much as design does. I think everyone should have their own word. Game right. If I'm lazy, I just say developer. Because that's intelligible and I think more upfront about its politics.
Yeah, but people from non-digital games are like, we're not developers. So
oh, that's fine. Yeah.
So where are they now? As like gamesters?
Yeah, gamesters. Yeah.
Gamesters, okay.
Borders.
That's right. Oh, I forgot to mention that all these slides put us all to shame. This is kind of fantastic. Also, like Rocky Horror. I think that we should do like the time warp dance at the end of this.
That's good.
That's totally what we should do. One of the things that I was thinking as I was listening to you is also like the design as a discipline is very long, but like I went to a design conference once and I realized that it was as messy a field as game studies is, because you had like the industry didn't want anything to do with the academia, and they were not talking to each other, and they made a panel about how to connect industry and academia, and they were like not talking to each other in the panel itself. So it's like, part of the problem that we have in teaching games is also that some people assume that we have to be at the service of the industry. And when we're not, it's like, well, what are you doing there? So like, how do we talk back? I mean, like here in the Game Center, we try to push back, as you seem like we're very proud. Rebellion, mini rebellion here. But like the kind of like the assumption that, I think in higher education, that we had to be at the service of industry and labor, like what is there? What should we go back to, or what do we invent that will allow us to do that? What do we tell people so that they believe one thing and we can do our own thing?
So this is a question that I'm always of two minds. And so the answer I would normally give is that, depending on my audience, I say different things. And, I may be more conciliatory in an environment where I don't want to offend somebody from the industry, but find ways to try to push back if I can. But again, coward, very shy, don't like talking. And in other environments, if somebody doesn't know anything about games, I'm a little bit more of an advocate of like them being exciting, right? When I talk to students, I don't say any of these things to them except for the grad seminar students, because it's not realistic. It's not the world that I live in. And I just don't like the world that I live in, And so the reasonable person answer is that you find what you can. The answer in my heart is, again, to be antagonistic, is that I don't know what else to do anymore, I guess. I don't want to play nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Time's up, right? not the talk. By the way, how long do we have? Because I'm kind of like, we can just go on forever. Okay, awesome. Okay. But so going back to that, it's like, okay, so we're done with this crap. We're fighting back. But in order to bite the hand that feeds us, we need power. And that's what keeps us from where we are. How do we gain power? I mean, like you've already hinted at one thing. It's like we have to do it together. We cannot do it on our own. Like, how do we crawl back and like get that power? Is it like local?
That's a great question, Claire.
I mean, like, you open it, so I'm like, okay.
I would love if I had an answer. Yeah, I think that is my frustration with what is possible. Because, as I said, like, I think I could get by if I was like, they're just commercial products. They're fun commercial products. I like them. But the ways in which we have bent and shaped ourselves around power that exists to get power, to do good things with that power, is so minute that it's difficult to imagine how to get power otherwise. Because we hold to the scraps of power we have by our fingernails, is this feeling I have. And I know it's cheesy, and again, I'm a person who tends to look inward and to avoid others and to try to solve a problem on my own instead of asking for help, but I still do think it is each other and being more public and honest. I think, again, that maybe I have just gone off the deep end of being extreme about it, but I think parts of this are things that all of us feel, and we don't talk about it because we want to be reasonable and we want to live in the world that we live in and get by day to day. And I think if we were able to have conversations with each other, we could find more ways to get our own power.
Yeah, let's see that we're not alone. So let me kind of do a segue that is going to sound weird, but it makes sense. Are you watching Andor?
No, I'm going to wait till the season is over.
Okay, because I know that Karina also likes Star Wars, like some of us in the department. So here's been this discourse around Andor, especially because the second season is way more expensive. And people are like, well, but this is Disney, the man, and they're paying for this very expensive TV show that is effectively about fighting a fascist regime. Hi. In case people had not picked that up from the first season, now as people are like, oh, is this happening? So how do we, like, I think that Andor is like an example of like, how do you thread that balance? Like, do we want to do the next Andor in games?
I once again have two answers.
Okay. Well,
my reasonable person answer and my real answer. My reasonable person answer is that I think that stories are powerful. And I think in a situation that is somewhat analogous to the way that I feel about parts of our industry, Star Wars fandom also has its questionable elements. And I think continuing to make stories that are in line with the original vision of the series is good. My unreasonable person answer is that it benefits the mouse to not act like everything that it makes is to its own power and profit. And so having things like that in that context is more of a negative than a positive, probably. I also personally, as a Star Wars fan, have continually had a hard time engaging with it with the mouse, because I just think it's different. Even though he's a millionaire, it's different when it's like a California hippie versus the media corporation that owns everything. And so again, the economic aspect of it is just hard for me to get past, even if it's something that I do like, and I'm going to watch when the second season's over. Yeah,
I mean, like that's the kind of the constant struggle. It's like you can, in order to create a message that gets to a lot of people, you have to kind of like buy into like the engines that already are in use. This is my last question, and I will open it up. It's not a trick question, but it's like, okay, so you said that everything is the problem.
Yeah.
Okay. Cozy games, how are they part of the problem?
Okay.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that it was going to be. Sorry. That means it's going to be interesting. Sorry, I put you in the spot.
I don't know, because again, I am increasingly terminally offline, and so I think a lot of that is terminally online, and so I'm not totally on the up and up on the cozy games thing either. Yeah, I mean, I think it's very, on one part, like, even from the outside, like, the most social media engage in is, like, I do watch TikToks. So I do, as a gamer, I do get cozy gaming content sometimes. And it's very clearly it's just a marketing position, right? It's just another way to differentiate between different users and find access to those users by using different aesthetics and terminology. Another part of me kind of feels really icky about the fixation on it, though, because it's like women that are making these videos and stuff. I don't know, and so I just stay out of it. It's as icky as everything else in video games is to me, I guess. It's just the new icky thing.
Yeah. Well, it's also like whenever you have a label, then it degenerates.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Problem. It's like, because we like labels. I mean, I don't, but like I think that's how we understand and oversimplify the world, and that's how we work. Okay, well, I'm done with my questions, and I won't put Karina on the spot anymore. But if
you can put me on the spot.
Okay. Well, I've done it enough. Do we have any questions from the audience? If you have questions, you can come down. Yes, Carl, are we ready? Do you want? Okay.
Oh, no.
Sorry, the big guns are coming down the aisle.
First, Karina, I want to say that was an incredible lecture, really inspiring, so well delivered, so smart.
Thanks, Eric.
It makes me so grateful to be part of this community, and for you to be part of this community, and for everything that led up to it, and the fact that you're sort of part of it but critical of it. It's just everything I love about what we do here at the Game Center. So I really want to thank you. It was really meaningful to me. So, I do have a question for you. It seems like a central sort of through line of your talk was that games are commercial products, and often unacknowledged as such, and even more than a commercial product like a chair, they're sort of like specifically designed to work on our psychology in a way, work through interactivity, manipulate desire and our thinking about money, et cetera, so that they're particularly pernicious. And I think it's a great critique of video games or games in general. So I guess I would really ask you, what I'm hungry to hear you talk about is, do you feel that there are examples of people doing work that you feel is, if cozy games aren't, one way to think about it, but are there examples of people doing work that are somehow biting the hand or resisting this notion or this way of working or way of being or way of producing that falls into the traps that you're highlighting? And these could be examples from your own thinking, from game makers, or maybe they are examples of practitioners outside of games, people working in other media, in other creative, artistic fields. I'm just curious and maybe this is a question with multiple correct answers, like the mouth with the teeth, or maybe no one is doing it perfectly, but there are people that you feel like have kind of parts of a possible answer that could be collaged. So I hope my question is clear.
Yeah, it's clear. What's unclear is if I have an answer. I always struggle with these kind of questions anyway, because I suddenly just am not aware of the concept of names. I can't remember people's names in general.
Right.
And I do think that I'm not sure if an extension of what I'm talking about can ever be ameliorated by any individual. That if I'm blaming myself and blaming everyone else, it is total. And I can't make an exception. Because, and I could be wrong here, I feel like we're stuck in a cycle of trying to get out of this, and we never do. And even if I can't name names, I do think everyone does do what I'm talking about in the sense of making things that are interesting and beautiful and not using those tools. It's just we don't have different words for them.
Right.
And so, yes, everyone's doing it, what I'm talking about, but also no one's doing it because there's no thing to call it,
right.
I guess.
I guess I would be curious, do you see some seeds or possible directions for future action in things like alternative collectives that are playing with organizational structures, in people trying to work with folk games, so they're working out of different traditions than the product-oriented commercial games? Or is it maybe curatorial strategies for how games are being presented to the public or being consumed in some ways? You know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying. Are you trying to get me to be constructive and productive about my rant?
Because I'm sort of an eternal optimist looking for things to do, and I love the directions that you're pointing in. So I'm just, but maybe you don't have.
I am an eternal pessimist.
Ah, okay.
I don't know, Eric. I don't know if you remember. I felt like this since I was an MFA, you know, and I feel like if there was something that I could hold on to, I would do that, and I wouldn't have given this rant, and I would have had something to say about games, I guess. And I'm sorry.
Right.
I know we have students here, and I should be productive and constructive for them, but I just can't.
But I think that also the kind of thinking you're doing and this kind of presentation, it is also a form of productive critical practice. So I want to recognize that. I'm not at all saying, oh, why aren't you doing something? No, not at all. This is the thing that you're doing, and it's amazing. So I just wanted to ask a question. Thank you so much, Karina.
Yo. Thank you for the talk. Really fantastic. I think you were able to put into words things that I also felt about the industry, especially as I explored it from a historical standpoint. When I did like this weird little dissertation, I wanted to do like something that, what's the history of game design? And I found it was made by the military. And so, I think that's very interesting. And I think what your talk is talking about is that connection, that very strong connection that D&D was made possible by Napoleon and, by war games, right? Like that's real. And that led to the formalization of game design. And so I think now we can look at games as this larger thing, but I wanted to ask, when I see games crack and I see the subsurface kind of boil up, I see it through jank, right? Like the game actually breaking. It goes against design, everything that you said in this talk. Do you feel like jank as a sort of like exploration of game design is kind of where you're going in terms of like where you're thinking or where you see it?
Maybe, yes. But not in the manifestation of jank itself, but the social celebration of it, I think.
Right.
I think that like even the word like jank is to imply a brokenness, right? I think, again, I'm overly fixated on words and I feel like I don't have a word to positively position that, but like people get excited about things that are broken in games, like the Oblivion remaster. Like half of the things I see about that are people just being excited that the bugs in the original game are still there. So yeah, I think like it's kind of a similar sense of like it's what people do together when they talk about them, and I think that if we could change the way we talk about them, it could grow and it could become something that isn't jank and something more.
Right. Yeah. And it's like jank is kind of like this punk, kind of thing. So I don't know. Very interesting. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Ditto. Great talk. Thanks. I guess I have sort of two questions. I hope that's okay. One is sort of an inversion of Eric's question. So I'm curious, like
someone especially guilty.
I guess like, you mentioned this, that there's been kind of this cycle like every 5 years or something since like, I don't know, the Dragon speech or whatever, like where people kind of trying to buck against this, that thing that you're talking about. And I guess I'm curious if you think that there's any like sort of mistakes that those movements have made that we can kind of learn from, like shortcomings that they failed to kind of, that trap them from there. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a good question. And my ego-stroking answer is that I think that their problem is that they always clung to game design desperately as like an immutable truth of what it meant to make games. And that even, like if you look at like the Not Games manifesto, it still talks about design. And I don't understand how you can extract contemporary design from what it does and what it is to make it into something beautiful. And so I don't want to be like the word police, but I think that a part of the construction of knowledge is the words that we use, the words that we choose to use and what they mean. And when you continue to use the same knowledge and tools as the thing you're critiquing, even if you are advocating for something, you are still perpetuating the usage of those things that on some level are doing the thing you don't like, if that makes sense. There are probably other things, but like I have become increasingly convinced that it is because of an over-attachment to the concept of game design and its various tools, I guess.
Yeah. What do you think of something like the Real-Time Art Manifesto, which kind of, I feel like that does it does kind of try to push beyond design? Is it just it didn't get adopted enough? Or how do you feel about Telltale's games? I don't know.
I don't even remember the Real-Time Art Manifesto.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
No, I mean, I know, yeah, I guess Telltale doesn't exist anymore. You know, like I maybe they don't use the word design. Maybe I am wrong, and I am once again committing the sins of my predecessors and not being knowledgeable enough to find the fault lines as they actually are. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah, I guess my second question, and then I'll stop, was I guess I'm also curious. I agree with you that there does seem to be something sort of special about games' kind of relationship with like bigotry and fascism and all of that. But I don't know how to locate that, because I feel like film has all of those same. Do you think there is something special about games, or?
Not inherently.
Okay.
I think, definitely not inherently, but I think like we made it to be special. As I was preparing for this talk, I started reading about the concept of manufactured desire, which is a similar kind of like idea of manufactured consent, but instead is about like pleasure and the idea that like pop media tells us what to like. And I didn't put it in here because I was worried I didn't understand it enough to use it. But it does feel like games don't have to be that way, but we've kind of made them the ultimate form of that, of a thing that has over time repeatedly told us what we want and what we like and recreated itself. And I think you can really see this when people talk about like friction in design, and that increasingly games are frictionless. It's because it's like this positive feedback loop of telling players what they want in terms of like UI or whatever, and then they demand that. And so it keeps getting smoother and smoother and smoother until there's nothing left. What was the question? Sorry, I'm so tired. Sorry.
No, yeah, I think you pretty much did. It was just like, is there something different about games?
Oh, yeah, okay. I think, even though I don't want to speak too authoritatively because I don't entirely understand it, I think it is like this really aggressive form of manufactured desire, of instilling desire in its user base.
Nice. Yeah, thanks.
Right.
Hi, I'm a video game developer, indie, from upstate New York, and we just had a playtest Thursday down the hall in the other room, which I thought was great timing. So I just wanted to say, first, I think the idea of calling game design elements fascistic in nature is a really good start to a conversation, even if I wouldn't agree with it 100%. Because it is good to get the, to look at the same thing we're used to and see it in a new way and kind of understand it. And I think with game design, it's a difficult thing because compared to film and literature, it's a much younger medium, right? Like it's gone hugely popular in like a fraction of the time. So there's parts of game history that have just been kind of forgotten and not as analyzed as others. Like, I'm a big fan of 90s fighting games like Fatal Fury. It's not a Trump hat. But that's a kind of an era where there was a lot of juice, a lot of let's get the player good feedback, but it was for a different reason than, say, let's EA trying to get people to do a bunch of microtransactions today. And I think it's kind of an example where...
In the interest of time, is there a question in here?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, let me skip past the stuff. I was thinking of, your critique reminded me of when the movie Fight Club, I saw somebody say, like, look at this director use these techniques. Look how the techniques of, like, close-up, shot, all that stuff. It projects a fascist narrative. And so it reminded me of that, like, game design as elements of a fascist narrative. What do you think about seeing game design as kind of neutral elements that are used, perhaps, to be used politically now? Is that a valid thing, or is that not enough, in your opinion?
Again, I have a reasonable answer and an extremist.
Both.
I mean, you have to do what you have to do, right? Like, you live in the world, and I don't think any of this is inherently bad or wrong. Like that they are inherently fascistic. I think that there is an overlap between this idea of like the big, strong government taking care of you and getting rid of the bad people, which it taught you to want in the first place, and giving up control of that with the way that we have positioned game design to this point. And that's where I'm seeing a little bit of an overlap. It doesn't have to be like that, though. And I don't think it is when you're just a game dev in upstate New York making games.
Right.
I think it's in total. And particularly if we're looking at a time when I think like the field was far less formalized, I don't think it's necessarily fair to like sort of look back on that and say like that was also fascistic, like games in the early 80s. Like it was a different time. So my unreasonable answer is that like at this point I don't know what to do because that's all I see. But it's not inherent, you know.
Okay.
I guess.
Yeah.
How long do we have?
Probably time for one more.
One more question. Sorry. Yes.
Thank you.
You can stick around later. It's okay.
Thank you.
Hi, Danny.
Hi. Super good. This one I think was hopefully fast. You just said like video games aren't games, and I like totally agree. But I'm wondering kind of like where you're coming from that sense, because there's like the metagaming sense where it's like there is no game in a video game. It has to be defined by a player existing and like choosing to partake in rules with like the like Lemieux and like Bollock like metagaming. But I was wondering is like, are you arriving at that kind of coming from like you can't describe like the idea of a video game is not something we've aesthetically defined at all when you're kind of talking about like the lineage from backgammon to video games? I'm just wondering like when you're saying like video games aren't games, like where is that, like where are you kind of tracing your path to that sentiment?
Not necessarily anything inherent to video games in and of themselves per se, because a lot of video games are games. I just don't think that video games as a whole are games. And I think that like sometimes we resist that because we have traditionally viewed it as an insult, as if to be a game is to be better than whatever the other option is. But I know it's like a weird thing to wonder about, but it's like this fixation on the game part and an obsessive disavowal of the video part, right? Like a constant fear of ever being anything like cinema, right? And there are game elements, but there are also movie elements, and there are also literature elements. It's not that video games aren't games, it's just that they aren't games any more than they are anything else to me, that they are video games, I guess. Someone told me that I should invoke Wittgenstein in this context to be like video games are like games in the sense of like a family of things that kind of have things in common. And I think that is kind of what I mean. Does that answer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. Good talk. Thanks for the questions. That's awesome.
There are a couple questions from Twitch chat also.
Oh, cool. Oh, we have a question from the chat. Oh,
All right, Twitch.
that was the last one.
User Curie Joe wants to know, who was worded specifically, how do you approach wanting, how do you approach wanting to interact with video games from the framework of media studies when games get critically rejected from those fields a lot?
Well, I don't know if it was clear, but I do not have a positive feeling about academia as an institution. And I think just because they reject it doesn't mean we shouldn't use it, I guess. I mean, you can if they're jerks, yeah. But I don't think and it doesn't change like the dynamics of power in general. Like I'm not advocating for like media studies instead. I like that aspect of academia in the same kind of like ambivalent way. Yeah, I don't know, but I don't think we can do game studies anymore. I don't know if that's working out for us.
Good enough for me, hopefully for them. User Sweet Baby Zays wants to reference the Audre Lorde line about about dismantling the master's house with the master's tools, and asks, is there a way to separate the art aspect from games from the product aspect of games, or are they just immutably tied together?
They're now immutably tied together. In my opinion.
That was like the one definite answer. Yeah. Okay. Are we done? Yes? More questions? No? Can we?
Thanks, sweet babies.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Karina.